What is film? How do we define film? Do you know what cinema is? Please describe cinema.
Do you
Talk
know
to
what
me about
cinema
cinema.
is?
Cinema is the
What is
central
film?
idea.
Where
Where
in
in
the
the
world
world
is
is
the
cinema
movie
made?
made?
Can cinema be more than central
cinema
idea?
means?
Where in the
Please
world is
describe
cinema?
cinema
What
in
is
three
film? How do we
words.
define
Cinema
film?
means
Do you know
please
what
describe
cinema
cinema
is?
describe
The central
cinema.
idea
What
that
is
makes
film?
What exactly is cinema now? And why does it matter? My name is Gabe Lomotey, and I will be discussing the concept of cinema through different works that include essays written by authors such as Francesco Cassetti, Jira Shambu, and Susan Sontag. So what exactly is cinema? Well, in all honesty, is there an actual definition? Film theory allows us to conceptualize the different ideas that are associated with the term, but theorists have argued that the word means more than one thing. Even as you look it up on the internet, the majority of the definitions apply cinema to the world of film as an art or apply it to a physical theater. For example, Merriam-Webster defines cinema as a motion picture theater, and when connecting it to movies, it is defined as the art or technique of making motion pictures. But we couldn't necessarily settle for that definition if we want to propose ourselves as great theorists now, would we? In terms of theater, Susan Sontag advocates for this immensely. Sontag writes in her essay, The Decay of Cinema, cinema was both the book of art and the book of life. In Sontag's essay, she stresses the importance of how cinema in the past had primarily had a magical effect on its audience. Within this essay, she primarily applies cinema as a physical experience, but with something we see visually. She emphasizes this concept in a way that cinema was merely an encounter that could only be experienced in a movie theater. As time had advanced, technology did too, and the use of the movie theater started to decay. She argues from the perspective of a cinephile that the feeling of being pulled into the film no longer has the same impression that it did in the past. She writes, now that a film no longer has a standard size, home screens can be as big as living rooms or bedroom walls, but you are still in a living room or a bedroom. To be kidnapped, you have to be in a movie theater, seated in the dark among anonymous strangers. Sontag brings up a good point to allow her readers to really ponder the idea of what it means to be engulfed in a film, but was she necessarily correct? She also writes, images now appear in any size and on a variety of surfaces, on a screen, in a theater, on disco walls, and on mega screens hanging above sports arenas. The sheer ubiquity of moving images has steadily undermined the standards people once had both for cinema as art and for cinema as popular entertainment. Sontag states in this passage that advancing away from the old traditional methods merely sabotages the meaning that films used to give to people. But is that necessarily true? Wouldn't we want to give people an experience that would kidnap their audiences to still feel the same way that they once did in a movie theater? By allowing this experience to travel into your home, shouldn't we praise this idea rather than belittle it? Sontag is someone we would define as a cinephile, and to place her in a specific group, we would state that she is an old cinephile. In Jira Shambu's essay for A New Cinephilia, he goes more in depth to explain the difference for his readers. He writes, the pleasures at the hand of the old cinephilia are dominantly aesthetic. He applies the old cinephiles with traditional techniques, those who are interested in auteur worship and the mise-en-scène. He also writes, a certain tendency of the old cinephilia, it has a conservative, nostalgic streak. Cinephilic experiences, especially from childhood and young adulthood, are treasured, sacralized, held close throughout one's lifetime. As Sarah Keller has argued, cinephiles often experience an anxiety, a defensiveness when their investments are imperiled, their pleasures threatened. But Shambu also gives his reader insight to the world of the new cinephile, to those who I was originally defending from Sontag. He states, the new cinephilia has a broader definition of pleasure. It values the aesthetic experience of cinema, but it demands more. For filmmakers who wish to create movies, including myself, I can only imagine the different creative options that we can bring to the table as current generation filmmakers. Filmmakers are able to utilize different techniques and in hopes of creating their own, such as how Steven Spielberg has emphasized critical moments within his films, dramatically pausing to show an expression to which is currently known as a Spielberg face. Thus allowing us to expand on from what cinema brings to the table, we are able to look at new forms of the art and put it into perspective for future generations to experience as well. For the current generation, cinema has started to expand away from just a fictitious world, but with different genres that have allowed filmmakers to still utilize their own methods and also include worlds that weren't as common in the past. For the new cinephilia, with its expansive notion of pleasure and value, films that center the lives, subjectivities, experiences, and worlds of marginalized people automatically become valuable. Understanding this concept, this allows creativity to emerge from the depths of what Sontag was originally preventing. Cinema itself does correlate to the film world, but it shouldn't be limited to that. We associate the term cinema to film primarily because of the theater, but we don't necessarily expand it. We stereotype films questioning what exactly makes the film cinematic, but we do not allow ourselves to consider it as an art as a whole. This brings me to the next point of relocation. Francesco Cassetti writes in his essay, The relocation of cinema. To recognize the presence of something cinematic in borderline situations implies, first of all, the acceptance of an imperfection. After reading through Cassetti's essay, I started to shy away from the fact that cinema could only stand for one thing. In relation to art as a subject, and one that we perceive carefully, cinema can be used as a medium. A medium is not only a support or a device, a medium is also a cultural form. It is defined most of all by the way in which it puts us in relation with the world and with others, and therefore by the type of experience that it activates. This starts to expand the connection that Shambu originally articulates in his essay and what Sontag originally left out in hers. It would be wrong to identify cinema as a sole object when there are different forms of it throughout the world. This can include auditorials such as podcasts, or music that is used to emit emotion to its listeners, or even YouTube videos which are meant to entertain and inform their audiences. Which brings me back to the idea of relocation that Cassetti forms in his essay. On one hand, relocation emphasizes the role of an experience. A given medium is defined by a specific type of watching, listening, attention, and stability. Therefore, it is not the permanence of its physical aspect, but the permanence of its way of seeing, hearing, and sensing that ensures its continuity. To recognize cinema as more than just a film is proof of development within the art field. I find it important that young film scholars and those who are familiar with the term start to expand their understanding on what cinema truly is. Therefore, cinema is not only a machine, it is also an experience in which other factors, cultural, social, aesthetic, play a role. It is one of the technical devices that, between the 19th and the 20th centuries, changed our way of coping with the world. This isn't necessarily downplaying that cinema isn't aligned with the world of film, but to prove that it can be expanded farther than what we see on a screen. It is what we hear through our headphones when listening to a podcast, or what we see in an art museum. In conclusion, cinema has just as much to offer from what you do in a theater as to what you do and see after. Allowing it to change over time and include more into its world will help those who originally saw it traditionally see it as an art form that can be much more expanded to this day. And that is exactly why it matters. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching.